Hello and welcome to the Truth Teller podcast if you're new, and welcome back if you are returning. Thank you for joining me today. I am in this series about marriage, and this is part 3, so I suggest you listen to part 1 and part 2, but before listening to this, but it's up to you. It doesn't matter that much, but I just think that it would be smart to get some backstory, but that's okay. So the title of this is Paul's Thoughts, but I just want to clarify that it's not necessarily Paul's thoughts because it's God's telling him what to say. But in this section, Paul's writing it, so I just title it that because he goes through a few different stuff in marriage. So kind of just summarizing it, it's Paul writing it, but it's really Jesus, But to give you context of this passage, I'm going to be reading in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 1 through 16. But to give you some backstory, so this is after Jesus. Last time I talked about what Jesus said about divorce, but now Jesus has died and he's resurrected and he's in heaven now, but he's like here with us. But that's confusing. That's a whole nother story. But Paul's backstory, it's I'm just gonna summarize Paul's backstory because it's kind of a whole thing that I'll hopefully get to at some point. But so Paul was originally named Saul, and he was, I think he was a Pharisee, but I do know the main thing is that he persecuted Christians. He killed them. He was seeking after them to stone them to death for believing in Jesus because they didn't want people to believe in Jesus. And then he had this revelation, which was a whole thing, but his name got changed to Paul, and then he is a full out Christian, and he's like all here for God, and he's just amazing. And he wrote a lot of books in the New Testament giving Christians guidance on how to live. And in this section, he's talking about married people. Okay, so now that we got a backstory, I'm going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. I won't do the whole section yet. We'll kind of do it in parts, and then I'll talk about stuff, That's what we're going to do. But we're going to start with verses 1 through 7, and this is the NIV version. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Okay, so I mentioned in a previous episode, I don't know if it was part 2 or part 1, but that I was going to talk a little bit about sex. So this is kind of awkward. This isn't necessarily not kid appropriate because I'm not going to go in detail, but I'm just going to say a little bit because Paul mentions it, so it's important to talk about it. The Bible mentions it, so it has to be said. But sex is meant to be special for husband and wife to share. It's an intimate, physical thing that is special for a husband and wife to kind of show that they love each other. And yeah. And then when you give yourself up before marriage, you are hurting yourself and the other person. So Paul doesn't mention having sex before marriage, but I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about it. That I can't talk. You're hurting yourself and the other person because you're wrecking your virginity. And then when you get married, it's not as special. Yes, you can, like, if you haven't been to the Lord, and then when you come to the Lord, but you already wrecked your virginity, that's okay. God can wipe you clean. But if you're claiming to be a Christian and your actions aren't showing, Jesus says that people know you are my disciples by your love. And if you're showing that you're, like, giving yourself up and you're not having that intimate thing just between a husband and wife, then you're just wrecking yourself. But done talking about that. Done talking about sex. We're not going to talk about that anymore. um But as Paul mentions in verse 4, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband, in the same way the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. So marriage is a relationship of self-sacrifice. You're giving yourself up for the other person, because that's what love really means, is giving yourself up for the other person. You're putting yourself down so that you can raise the other person up, because you truly love them. But you're becoming one body with them, spiritually and physically. with So you're becoming one body with another person, so you have to love the other person like yourself, because they're practically you, if that makes any sense. It's kind of confusing. But so you have to love them and care for them like you would care for your own body. Like, you go to the gym, you eat healthy if you do those things, but you want to care like that. You want to put time and effort into the other person like you put time and effort to make yourself feel nice, you know? Okay. um, but because it's a marriage of self-sacrifice and giving yourself up, you should not go into the marriage with greedy expectations. Now, what does that mean? That means going into the marriage expecting them to do stuff for you. Like saying, oh, they should just know that I want this. Oh, they should just make me feel this way. They should just do this. Like, no, you want them to do this. You should have expectations, but not greedy ones. Like, and also not, like, if you can have you can have expectations, but those expectations should not, like, make or break the relationship. You know what I mean? Like, if, like, people aren't perfect, they can't fulfill every single thing. Like, when it comes to expecting your future husband to be a Christian, that's fine. Expecting your future husband to love you, that's fine. But if you're saying they must be perfect, that's stressful and that's not biblical, because that's impossible to be perfect. Um, but you can't go into the relationship expecting them to do stuff so that it can make you feel good. Um, like, they should be giving their. So if you want what you want and the other person wants what you want, then it's basically abuse. It's unequal. You're unequally yoked. And we'll kind of, I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But if you want what you want and the other person wants what they want, then it's not going to work out, because you're not getting anywhere. You're not loving each other because you only care about what you want. But if you want what they want and they want what you want, then it's going to go amazing. Like, it won't be perfect, of course, but you're both giving yourself up for the other person and it'll be amazing. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that, because a lot of people go into a marriage with expectations that are only for themselves, but marriage is self-sacrifice. You're giving yourself up. Okay, into the next section, which is 1 Corinthians 7, verses 8 through 9. Now, to the unmarried and the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, marry. Oh, wait. If they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So even though this is a marriage series, we're still talking about singleness in every single episode that I have noticed. But we are not meant to be alone, but God can do so much in a season of singleness. And when we're alone, we have friends that God provides. And if you don't have friends, then just seek the Lord and you figure that out with Him, because I don't know your specific situation. But sorry, that wasn't meant to be mean. Um, but you can spend that extra time you would have with another person to learn more about God and practice being more like Jesus. And there's so many, like, it's just human nature to be drawn to the opposite gender, you know? And so that's why Paul's like saying it's better to get married than to burn with passion, because you want to get married, and so many people are meant for that, but not everyone is. So I just want to say that. Okay. The next section is um 1 Corinthians 7, 10 verses 10 through 11. So I'm just staying in the same chapter. I'm just going down in the verses, just clarifying that. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband um, must not divorce his wife. So I went in more depth with this in like divorce in the last episode. And I talked about what Jesus said about divorce and just kind of saying it again. I'm kind of repeating a lot of stuff, but that's okay. But God does not want couples to divorce because it's a lifelong commitment to love God and serve each other, that self sacrifice thing. Um, and then also it's saying not to remarry because, like Jesus says, that if you remarry, then you're basically committing adultery, unless in the situation of sexual immorality, which is like the other person cheated on you. But if you're remarrying, then you're committing adultery. That's not what I said. That's what the Bible says. Okay. Like, I'm just getting a little defensive here because I feel like I'm going to get comments on that. But that's what the Bible says, is that if you remarry, you're committing adultery unless in the situation of sexual immorality. And that's just because you're one. And then when you're breaking apart, you're breaking apart one thing, two things that were okay, man and woman were meant to be, they were separated, like I talked about in the first episode. Eve came out of Adam, so they were one, and then they're meant to come back together to be one. And then if you're divorcing, you're breaking that one thing, and then you're trying to stick it with another, and that's like messed up. But if you're committing a sexual immorality, then that one thing was already broken. So yeah. Got a little deep there. But the next section is verses 12 through 16, and this is the last section. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or the sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So during this time, I believe that marriages were arranged by the parents. It was usually like the parents would um, give up their daughter or son or whatever. I think it was typically the daughter, but if you were in debt, then you would be like, I'll give my daughter up for to marry your son or whatever. Something like that. But they were usually arranged by the parents. So if they were unequally yoked, which, okay, let me explain what that means, because some people don't understand, which is fine. It's a weird subject and some adults don't even get it, but like a lot. But anyways, it's like basically when you don't believe the same thing. So a yoke, kind of going in deeper into this, a yoke is a device that goes on two ox or two cattle or something, and it connects them together. And with the right partner, this is what studies say, is that with the right partner, an ox can go, or cattle can go 3 times the amount it can go by itself. So it not only doubles, but it triples how fast it can go with the right partner. But with the wrong partner, they're just going to be spinning in circles. Like if someone's trying to go and the other person just wants to eat grass, you're just going to be spinning in circles. And eventually the other person's going to get tired of trying to go because the other one won't go. So then you both stop. And then you're both just eating grass and you're not going anywhere. So that's what happens with marriages when you're unequally yoked. If one person is on fire for the Lord, wants to grow in their relationship with God, and the other person doesn't care and just wants to live life how they want to live it, then the other person's going to be spinning in circles. You're not going to get anywhere because you are one together, because you're connected. And then you're going to get too tired of trying to seek after the Lord, and then you might end up just stopping altogether. So that's what unequally yoked means. And if you're equally yoked, then you're both going 3 times the amount, because you got your spouse, and then you have God, and you're on 3 times the amount. Like, this is actually what happens. It goes 3 times the amount. It's really cool how we can learn so much from God's creation about God. um, but anyways, so if they were unequally yoked, they had to pretty much just deal with it because, like I said, the wife could not divorce the husband, I believe, and the husband, yeah, they basically had to deal with it because he was arranged. Um, so that's why Paul's kind of mentioning it, and he's telling them to stay together so you can minister to the other person, like, because the other person will be made a believer, like be sanctified through you, which I think that's actually really cool. I did not know that until I read this section when I was making my notes for this episode. But um, because you're equally yoked, but you're not gonna, yes, you're gonna be sanctified, but like I said, you're gonna get tired and you might fall away from the Lord, or you'll keep on fire for the Lord, but you're not gonna grow because you need help to do that. You need help with the community of Christ, and your marriage is really what affects what's in your heart. But Paul's saying that if one person leaves, then that's their choice. You don't have to make them stay, you know. But in today's terms, if you just this is my advice. I really strongly believe this, that to wait, like, it's kind of to, like, be friends with, I think that you should be friends with someone for a while before start dating, because dating is practice for marriage. And some people might think that's absurd, but that's what I believe. So no hate, please. um but I think that if you really like another person but they're not a believer and you're a believer, which is totally understandable, I wouldn't start dating them though until you're like, be friends with them, and then also like minister to them, tell them about God before you start dating. And like, once you know that they believe, then I would maybe jump into that, or maybe you realize they're not the right person. But I wouldn't jump into a relationship with, because you're gonna want to bring God into it, and they're gonna be like, no, I don't want some guy in the sky to be part of our relationship. And it's like, he's not a guidance guy. Obviously, I'm just saying that's what other people say, like non-believers. But um, I say the most random stuff. But it's I would wait to marry the other person until they believe. But if you do marry unequally yoked, not because it's necessarily arranged, but because you chose that, then stay together because it's a lifelong commitment. But I'm just saying you're gonna be running in circles. But I would definitely try to minister to them. Don't hide your faith because you want them to love you. Um, I heard it said this way. I think it was if you know who Ali Schnacky is, she's a YouTuber. And she has her own podcast and like the Jay Walker's podcast. I like listening to those. I would suggest listening to those too. But um, she talked about how she had a revelation that, like, a dream that she was in heaven and she had blood on her hands because she was guilty because God gave her the opportunity to tell people about heaven, tell them about God so that they could be in heaven. But she didn't tell them because she was too afraid or whatever. And now they're in hell, and their death was because of her, because she didn't tell them about God. So that really spoke to me because if you're like, because that's so real. um, but that has to do with marriage because if you're unequally yoked and one person believes and the other doesn't, and you're not ministering to them because you want to stay in the relationship, you don't want them to leave you, um, then they're gonna go to hell and it'll kind of be your fault, which is deep. That's like convicting. It's like, don't tell me that. But yeah, that's true. It's your fault. Um, if you chose not to tell them. But and because that was the last section, we're kind of ending off on a deep note. Um, but I hope that you heard God through me. I hope that you learned more about what the Bible says, and I hope I explained it well. I'm trying my best. I'm not married. I'm not even close to being married, but I just want to. I think the Bible talks about it, so that means it's important, and it can be confusing sometimes. So I want to help people understand. I know this was kind of a longer one compared to my other episodes, but thank you for listening and staying till the end if you're at this point. I hope you join me again. I hope the rest of your day is blessed.